When they have a challenging episode or they have a crisis or something, that bucket is dumped out. And so we need to make sure we're constantly filling that bucket with those little tiny moments of positive interactions.
Welcome to the Misfit Behaviorists podcast. Join your hosts, Audra Jensen and Caitlin Beltran, here to bring you evidence-based strategies with a student-centered focus. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Misfit Behaviorists podcast. We're happy to be here. Hope you all are having a wonderful summer and are not working too much and are spending some time at the pool. Both Caitlin and I are in very warm rooms because the heat outside is terrible and it's all encroaching on my house. So yeah, it's so hot. It's so hot. Anyway, don't forget to find us on Instagram and Facebook and get our freebies there, as well as like and subscribe. And what are we talking about today?
Okay, so today we are talking about building relationships as a school-based BCBA. And I know for me, this was something that was kind of tricky for me when I moved into the role of BCBA from a classroom teacher. So for example, when I had my own classroom, obviously I was doing all the things, cultivating relationships, teaching, working on behaviors, taking data, the list goes on and on. Not that my list is any shorter now, but one of the things that just kind of inherently came naturally was the building relationships part, because I was with my students all the time. And when I moved into the role of BCBA, both at my private school and also now in my public school, I had to go kind of find ways to build relationships with these kids, especially if it was kids that I didn't teach. Like in my first job, I kind of inherited the role of the BCBA who worked with the classroom. So I at least knew some of my caseload really well. But now, for example, as many BCBAs I'm sure listening in public schools can relate, coming up to a new school year, I'm anticipating I'm going to get to know a lot of students this year because they're having challenging behaviors and get referred to me. And so my very first encounter, if it is that type of situation, could be where I'm either seeing or working with a student who's having a challenging time. And so you can imagine, as much as we try to avoid that scenario, it still sometimes happens and doesn't lend itself to a foundation for a great relationship between that student and I, unless I'm doing things to counteract that along the way.
Yeah, and there have been different relationships that we have. If you've done a clinical model, your relationships there are going to be a little bit different. If you're working direct with the students, it's going to be different. And then as you move up, you're doing just supervision. You're more relationships with your staff, your RBTs, and your paraprofessionals. And then maybe you're moving more to a clinical lead role or something, and then it's even less. So you're more displaced from the kids. And so I think, it's really important to always be mindful that we have to connect, because then you see a lot of our administrators have kind of gone that way and have lost the connection with students and sometimes make decisions forgetting what it's like to just be on the floor with the students. And so I think this is a really important topic because we always need to have the students top of mind at all times.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to note part of it is just the role is changing. So if you are, like me, going from teacher to BCBA, or like Audra mentioned, going from teacher to a supervisor or admin of some kind, as much as your heart might still be in the classroom somewhat, that was hard for me in my private school. I had a really hard adjustment to that, and I wanted to be in the classroom all the time. And so thinking like I'd have to get to know these kids, but I really did have to remind myself like I'm no longer their teacher. My time also needs to be used doing different things, and I have to just kind of get creative about how I can build relationships with these kids.
Yep.
So I have kind of like 3 broad strategies on how to do that, on how to build and cultivate relationships with students coming from the perspective of a BCBA who, for me, I'm not even seeing these students every day. I bounce from building to building, back to building to building. So I'm in the building, each building 1 to 2 times per week, maybe 3 max. First, and you kind of alluded to this in a clinical model, but I feel like it holds true in public schools as well. It really does start with building and preserving the relationship between you and the teacher. So if I'm working with a student, for example, in a self-contained classroom or an inclusion or a gen ed classroom, I, run the gamut. I serve on the RTI committee. I help with our self-contained population. So I'm working with a lot of different teachers in a lot of different roles. And that relationship that I have with them really sets the tone of like how comfortable I feel in their classroom, how willing they are to have me in as like a pop-in or a guest reader or somebody to take one of the kids for a walk or something. So I can't even really begin to think about getting to know that student further unless I'm taking time to, and it doesn't have to be more time. I'm not asking you to do something that takes an hour per week. Just that we've talked about before as a school-based BCBA, building relationships with teachers and making sure you're being flexible and, setting open door policy, and not in the way of asking you to do something that takes more time, just in kind of reframing it and thinking about, if I really want to have a great relationship with this student, even if this teacher and I are not agreeing on every single strategy, using those tips that we've highlighted in prior episodes, like being flexible with the teacher, getting their preferences, finding out when they want you to pop in versus when they don't, and all those little things.
I love this idea just in general. We've done, things like we've asked to come in and do a read story for the classroom. And I can tell you, teachers love you to be able to do that. It gives them a moment of breather during the day, and it shows you in a very good light. And then it gives you a chance to start to connect with the kids. Once they start to get to know you, if you are in there for a particular student, then you're already known. It's not some weird thing. So I'd love to go in and do reading time and stuff like that with the kids. Teachers much appreciate that.
For sure. And that's a win-win for everyone. And that kind of brings me to my second tip, which is, if you are working with a learner who, I'm thinking of a few off the top of my head in the past year or so, where I'm getting called to their classroom because they're having a behavior. And even if I think, okay, today I'm going to go in and, offer to read them a book or something, first thing that happens is maybe there's a challenging episode and they're calling me to support them working through. Sometimes the learner has eloped from the classroom, and it's my job to guide them back to the classroom. And you can imagine that's not getting me very far if I'm like, hi, what's your name? And also come with me. If I have zero relationship with a student, which that has happened where it just came out of nowhere, but that's pretty few and far between. Usually it's somebody I do know. So I'm always trying to be proactive and banking my time with that learner in thinking ahead to something could happen tomorrow morning. And I don't want to wait for, that next negative encounter to happen, because the more negative experiences we have, even if we take the time afterward, if we're involved with a challenging behavior, sometimes I'm called and the teacher has to go back to her other students. And then I'm seeing this through the learner. I mean, even if I take time afterward to validate them, to make sure I do a follow-up activity with them, they're still remembering me as the person who came when something was bad. I have a learner right now who is in our ESY program, and he had a rough year. Many medication challenges, many family changes, just a lot of things happened where he was taking it out in, challenging behaviors in school. And in the summer, he's in a different classroom. So he's already with a different teacher and different set of staff. And we always had a great relationship. Like, even throughout the school year between those challenging behaviors, I would come in and say, hey, and he would let me sit with him and do activities. And for whatever reason in his mind, it's summer and I'm not supposed to be there. And I also represent, I think, his challenging time in his past. And so I'll walk in the classroom, like just this morning, and I'm like, oh, hey, how are you? And he's like, bye, you can leave now. I know. And I'm like, try not to take it personally. I'm okay. Which, of course, I'm not taking that personally. So what I did was, like, I told the teacher, I'm going to come back every hour on the hour and just be like, hey, everybody, you're looking great. And then so she caught on quick and she was like, oh, hey, Miss Beltran's here. Everybody say hi to Miss Beltran. She's just saying hi. So this is just a regular thing. I'm not here because anyone was bad. But sometimes I have to do that with other learners as well, who are in, general ed kindergarten or inclusion first grade or whatever it might be. The learners who I think are more sensitive to, what are you doing here? Is it because I was bad? I try to really make myself a fixture in that classroom and just somebody that they're going to see naturally throughout the day, so that if they do see me as a result of a challenging behavior, it evens out in the wash, so to speak. And I do that with not taking a ton of time. I mean, some of the go-tos are, of course, if they're earning a reward break and I can help that teacher by taking them on the reward. Again, it could be a win-win where the teacher is getting some free time or something like that, and I'm enjoying just a positive, like I'm just taking them to the playroom for 5 minutes and coming back, or I'm just doing a fun reward break with them. Or, to circle back to the first option, I've had times where I say to the teacher, why don't you take him? Because I can notice that your relationship is a little bit like he's seeing you as the bad guy and I'm the fun cop who's always bringing the rewards in. So I'll say, let me cover your class for those 5 or 10 minutes. And that could also be a valuable piece. And it doesn't even always have to be something huge. It could just be like me positioning myself outside my office around 11:30 on Mondays, because I know that's when his class lines up for gym. And if I pass my office and I'm like, hey, everybody, looking good, first grade. Now he's seeing all of his friends are saying hi to me. Everyone loves to wave when they're in first grade, get a couple fist bumps in. And then it's not strange or weird if I'm coming in the classroom and saying hi to him, because all his friends know me. I'm just another teacher who works in the school.
Well, and if you think about it this way, when a student has a challenging behavior, they're sort of dumping the bucket of, their love out, but everything that we do with them in a positive way fills their bucket a little bit, so
Exactly.
every little pebble goes into the bucket. And when they have a challenging episode or they have a crisis or something, that bucket is dumped out. And so we need to make sure we're constantly filling that bucket with those little tiny moments of positive interactions. Plus, that's what's fun. I mean, dude, we got into teaching I got into teaching because it's super fun to be I didn't get in for the paperwork or definitely not the money. So that's not why we get into teaching. So, that's the fun stuff.
I got in for the graphs, but no, and the money. It's just so great.
Yeah, the money is just so great.
Exactly. And right. And I think it also there's just so many positives when you start to look at it. I'm not putting it on my schedule like, oh, go to so-and-so's classroom so that he can see me as a positive. So that when I call him, it's not like a to-do list.
It's the fun
the
stuff.
benefits. Yeah. I mean, it's fun. Like I get to go outside for recess for 5 minutes and throw the football around because that's what he wants to do. And I'm like, this is my job. Amazing. Yeah. 5 minutes later, I'm in an IEP meeting, but
who wants to be dealing with crisis all day, every day? I mean, you have to for us not to get burned out ourselves, we have to be able to have the fun stuff too.
Yeah. And when I see that learner in a positive, not only just as a human, it helps our relationship, but I also get to know them better. And then I'm able to de-escalate them more quickly. And there's learners that I grow to know them so well. I mean, no situation is ever perfect, but I have changed my approach with a particular learner from, the beginning of the year to the end of the year based on my interactions with them during our reward breaks or our brain breaks, because I got to know them as a person. And so when they were frustrated, maybe something I tried in September, I never would think to use that strategy versus by then I knew them so well. I was like, okay, I'm going to do the counting backwards. Then I'm going to do the visuals. Then I'm going to set the timer. And all of a sudden we're kind of in a flow because we really do know each other much better.
Yeah, I love that.
So I kind of combined 2 and 3. Let's to review. My tip number 1 was really making sure you're cultivating a positive relationship with the teacher. Again, if it's somebody you're friends with or somebody of the same ideals about the behavior plan, that's great. If not, really trying to set that tone in a positive, even if you're not best friends or won't ever be friends, because that student also might be picking up on, oh, if the teacher is, happy to see me, then maybe I'll be happy to see them too. And then 2 and 3 being 2 kind of like pop in for the rewards. So like you said, you're filling the bucket, not just with the everyday visits, but also say you have them on a punch card and they're getting a punch after every class. Maybe I'm coming in math and saying, oh my gosh, it looks like he's doing so well. Mrs. Audra, may I give him a bonus punch? And then it's, whoa, I'm going to reach my reward faster. And I get to be the one punching their card one step closer to the reward break.
Yeah, I love that.
And then number 3, just being present and being visible. So that's what I mean when I say hanging outside my office for those 5 minutes, popping in during snack. I know they always have snack at 10:30 and I'm just going to come in to deliver some papers to the teacher rather than stick them in her mailbox because I know I'll get like another hello, another fist bump, and having the class also see me as just a regular person in the building and not somebody who's only coming for negative or challenging times.
I love all of those.
And I think also building relationships with the parents or guardians. I didn't really mention that here. But again, that was just a little tricky for me trying to navigate when I moved from teacher. We just talked last week about the daily checklist, the report sent home. I was the one doing all those. So now moving into this role where I'm like one step removed, even though I might have access to the teacher's reports, it's not coming from me. I'm not there when it happens every day per se, and I'm not the one conveying the message, and nor should I be necessarily. But it's just taken that out of my hands. So maybe I'm trying to schedule a check-in email to mom or dad, or, hey, I've been looking at the data. Do you want to, schedule a brief phone call? Any changes at home? And maybe I'm the point person where, again, I can take something off the teacher's plate, but also build that relationship. And sometimes it's really nice for that parent to have an additional person to talk to, because let's face it, if you are a teacher, your time is so valuable. And you already have phone calls and emails scheduled with so many different parents. Maybe I have a little extra time between meetings one day and I can field that parent and be that kind of ear for mom and validate what she's going through compared to what we're going through, cross-check our strategies, just kind of hear her out and make sure we're consistent in our approach.
Yeah, we can even choose to create, a monthly newsletter or something with behavioral strategies or something that's a general thing that goes out to lots of students, but then we're kind of getting our face out there. Hey, this is my role in your classroom, in your school, and here are some things that we're working on in kind of a general way, and that kind of gets you that connection with the families as well. So that when you
Yeah.
call up and say, hey, I'm more specific on your case, now you know who I am.
Yes. And always, I think if I'm ever asked to consult, even if I don't need formal permission, I'm trying to think of a scenario where just a teacher might say, hey, do you have any like extra punch cards? Or I keep using the punch card analogy, but reward tickets for this learner. And I'll ask the teacher, of course, but say, you want me to email mom and just see, does she and dad have any challenges at home as well? Because maybe they're seeing it in both. And I've had that happen where I've reached out to a parent. The rest of the year was fine. Like the student was amazing. The reward plan worked perfectly. But the next year, he had a really challenging year. And the parent of the student said, I always remembered you from initially when we had the first sign of struggle, you were on top of it. And so I was like, whew, thank God I did that year.
That's great.
But it taught me a lot because she knew my name when, in that year, he was low on my radar. But she remembered that I'd taken the time to help and also make that connection.
That's great.
So I think just to sum up, it's important. It can be hard. It can be really hard adjustment. We get a lot of questions from people about moving into the role of BCBA or support staff coming from the teacher role. For me, and I've had friends do it and think, you know what, that's not for me. My heart is in the classroom. That's where it's always going to be. I think my first year moving from teacher to BCBA, I was like, this was a huge mistake, but it was really just growing pains. And now I've grown to really love what I do. And I love seeing all different classrooms and meeting so many different students and educators. But what works for one doesn't always work for another.
You got to do your graphs more often now.
I know there's just so much more to graph, but there's
much
less
more
time.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I think next week I'm looking at, the next week's episode is going to come out right before or right during back to school. And so I think we'd like to talk about riding the bus and different strategies for some of our learners who have a hard time on the bus. And so I think coming up with talking about kind of, what has worked and not worked. As always, everybody feel free to reach out to us if you have something you want us to talk about or a concern that you're getting into the beginning of the school year. This is when we get a lot of information of stuff that's going on, something unique challenges you might be dealing with that maybe we can address and talk about. Shoot us an email or find us on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Misfit Behaviorists. And be sure to tune in next week for more tips and tricks. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.